Subscribe to the channel, do it now. New stories every day. Now let's get started. My name is Mark Barrett. I'm 38 years old, originally from a small town in Illinois, though I moved to the suburbs of a larger city after I married my wife, Jess, 35. We share one daughter together, Sophie, who's 6. Until recently, I believed our family life was solid. Yes, Jess and I argued here and there, small squabbles about chores or finances, typical marriage stress. But what marriage doesn't have tension? Overall, we were content, or so I thought. Then came the day everything unraveled, starting with one impulsive trip to the mall. A sudden suspicious trip. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I was off work early from the auto repair shop where I'm employed. I remember sitting on the living room couch watching Sophie play with her dolls on the rug. Jess was scrolling through her phone, half paying attention to us. That's when she abruptly stood up, muttering something about needing to grab a few things from the mall. I found it a bit strange. She rarely just dashed off without at least letting me know in advance. "Hey, where are you going?" I asked, a little surprised. Jess shrugged and tossed her phone into her purse. "To the Greenway Mall. I want to pick up a few items on sale." Now, it's nearly 4 in the afternoon, and the mall is an hour away. "I know, but it's a good sale," she insisted. "I won't be long. An hour, maybe 2 at most." She gave Sophie a quick hug. I frowned, but I thought he said you'd do some reading practice with Sophie tonight. Jess avoided eye contact. "We can do it when I get back." She checked her car keys and turned to me with a fleeting smile. "Thanks for watching her." That was it. She walked out, leaving me feeling unsettled. Typically, if Jess wanted to shop, she'd let me know in the morning or plan for the weekend. This last-minute dash felt odd. 4 hours and no word. 2 hours turned into 3, then 4. By now, Sophie was getting hungry, so I made some mac and cheese. I texted Jess. "Everything okay? Let me know when you're heading back." No reply. I called her straight to voicemail. I tried to stay calm, but worry gnawed at my stomach. Sophie looked up at me, her big eyes concerned. "Daddy, is Mommy okay?" I forced a reassuring smile. "She's fine, sweetie. Just caught up at the mall, I guess." But inside, alarm bells were ringing. Jess rarely ignored my calls. Something was definitely off. After giving Sophie dinner, I decided I wasn't comfortable just waiting anymore. I asked my neighbor, Donna, a kindly retiree who adores Sophie, if she could babysit for a bit. She agreed eagerly. Then I hopped in my truck and headed to Greenway Mall. An hour's drive. The entire way, I tried to rationalize. Jess must have lost track of time or her phone battery died. But my gut told me there was more to it. The shocking discovery. Around 8 p.m., I pulled into the mall's crowded parking lot. Most shops close around 9, so it was still busy with people trying to wrap up their shopping. I walked the corridors, scanning each store, occasionally calling Jess's name in my head. Finally, in a corner near a trendy clothing boutique, I spotted her. Jess was standing with a man I'd never seen before. About our age, lean, wearing a casual jacket and jeans. He had one hand on her arm as they laughed about something. They looked close. Definitely not just two strangers chatting about a product. My heart pounded, chest tightening in anger and confusion. I approached quietly, trying to gather composure. Jess turned her head, and her eyes locked with mine. In that instant, her laughter vanished, replaced by sheer shock. The man also noticed me, his smile fading to an uneasy expression. "Jess," I said, voice tight, "what's going on?" She pulled her arm away from him. "Mark, I thought you were at home." I was. I tried to keep my voice steady. "I texted you, no response. I got worried and came to find you." Her cheeks flushed red. I must have missed your calls." The man cleared his throat, forcing a polite smile. "Hey, I'm Alex," he said. "Just a friend." I stared at him, then turned back to Jess. "You left Sophie alone, you know." Jess's eyes went wide. "Alone? No, I'd assumed you'd be there with her, Mark." I almost laughed, though nothing was funny. "You took off without telling me how long you'd be. I had errands too. So yeah, I left Sophie with the neighbor eventually. Otherwise, she'd be home alone." She opened her mouth, struggling for words. Alex tried to intervene. "Look, man, this is probably a misunderstanding." But I ignored him, focusing on Jess. "You've been gone 4 hours, Jess, 4 hours, with no call, no text. Then I find you here with him. I just needed a break." Her voice trembled defensively. "Things at home have been stressful. I'm not doing anything wrong." "Not wrong?" I repeated, my temper flaring. Then why do you two look so cozy? I glanced at Alex, who was eyeing me warily. Do you realize she has a 6-year-old daughter waiting at home? He raised his hands in a defensive gesture. Chill, man, we're just talking. That single word, chill, pushed me over the edge. I stepped closer, adrenaline surging. Don't you tell me to chill. You're messing around with a married woman. Mark, Jess hissed, grabbing my arm. Stop making a scene. A scene? I barked out a bitter laugh. Is it a scene to wonder why my wife is sneaking off with some guy she's never mentioned before, leaving our child behind? Alex moved, trying to position himself between me and Jess. Look, you're reading this all wrong. I shoved him, not caring if it was right or wrong. Don't act protective of my wife. He recovered, scowling. She's not your property, man. Jess tried to pull me back. Both of you stop. But my anger was too raw. I shoved him again, and he retaliated with a clumsy swing. Next thing I knew, we were grappling, cursing. My fist connected with his cheek, and he staggered back into a row of mannequins, sending them crashing. Jess screamed, "Stop, both of you." Shoppers gasped. Cell phones came out to film. Within minutes, mall security swarmed. We ended up with me pinned to a security guard's chest and Alex pinned by another. Jess stood there, tears streaming, stammering apologies to the guards and onlookers. My heart still pounded, blood roaring in my ears. The police get involved. Security escorted all three of us to their small office behind the mall's main corridor. They wanted statements, but things escalated fast when I mentioned how Jess had left our 6-year-old daughter alone for hours. The guards called the police, who arrived and took us to the station. I'll never forget sitting in a cramped interview room, uniformed officers glancing at me with a mix of annoyance and pity. They asked me to explain the fight. I told them the gist. I found my wife with some unknown guy, lost my temper. A physical scuffle ensued. The policemen scribbled notes, nodded, and then asked, "So your child was home alone?" She was alone initially, but eventually I left her with a neighbor so I could find Jess, I explained. But yes, for some time we had no supervision for her. He frowned. Your wife didn't arrange anyone? No, she didn't, I said, bitterness creeping in. I had no idea she'd be gone that long or that far. They questioned Jess in a separate room. I guess she tried to downplay the incident, calling it a family misunderstanding. Meanwhile, Alex was fuming, demanding charges against me for assault. The cops told him he could file a complaint. But they also reminded him I claimed self-defense once he swung. Possibly the case would be seen as mutual combat. Neither of us ended up locked in a cell that night, as the police considered it a minor brawl. But the bigger bombshell was the child situation. One officer told me that they might have to contact Child Protective Services. Sure enough, within an hour, a social worker arrived. A no-nonsense woman in her 40s named Samantha. She listened to each side, eyes narrowing as Jess tried to claim she thought I was at home with Sophie. But you didn't verify it. Samantha pointed out, your daughter is only 6. Jess stammered, yes, but Mark is always around on weekdays, I thought. I cut in. I had errands. She didn't give me any time frame. She basically took off. The policeman nodded in agreement as if none of this made sense. Samantha then said, we have to ensure the child's safety. If it's a one-time incident, we might monitor the situation rather than remove her. Jess paled, tears in her eyes. We're not bad parents. I stared at her. I repeated, I didn't vanish for half a day with some random man. After a few hours of statements and forms, they let us go. No one pressed serious charges that night, though the possibility lingered if Alex wanted to push it. For the child's sake, and since no severe injuries occurred, the police decided to keep it in their records but not proceed further. Samantha said she'd be following up, maybe scheduling a home visit. Jess tried to ride back with me, but I refused. I told her, find your own way. She looked hurt but didn't fight me. I had no idea if she'd call a taxi or Alex, frankly. I didn't care. I returned to my neighbor's house around midnight. Sophie was asleep on the couch, a blanket over her. I carried her home, laid her in her bed, and sat in the living room, shaking with adrenaline and heartbreak. Jess arrived an hour later in a taxi, quietly slipping into the house. We didn't speak a word that night. She slept in the guest room. The final confrontation. The next morning, I woke up feeling raw. Sophie was stirring, so I got her ready for school. Jess hovered, trying to talk to me in hushed tones. Mark, let's discuss last night. I glared. What's there to discuss? You left Sophie basically alone to meet some guy an hour away. That's all I need to know. She whispered, I swear it's not what it looks like. I'm not sleeping with Alex. She choked on the name, seeing my anger flare. Then what is it? I demanded. Because the way you two looked in the mall, the way he stepped in to defend you, that's not normal for a so-called friend. She hesitated. It's complicated. I've been feeling lonely, Mark. You're always working or busy, and I needed someone to talk to. Someone. I repeated, voice trembling with pain. So you found a random guy to share your secrets with, ignoring your daughter's safety. She bit her lip, tears pooling. I messed up. I never planned for Sophie to be alone. Yet you never bothered to confirm if I was free to watch her. We stood in silence. Finally, I said, Sophie's my priority. You can keep your fling or not, but you crossed a line. She broke down, sobbing. Mark, please, I love you. Don't do anything drastic. I promise I won't see him again. But I couldn't believe her. Even if you're telling the truth about not sleeping with him, you made the choice to risk our daughter's well-being. That's enough. She begged me not to separate, to consider therapy or counseling. But the memory of that smug grin on Alex's face, the memory of Jess ignoring my calls for hours, I just couldn't see how to fix it. We'll see how Child Services handles it, I told her coldly, but I'm planning to file for divorce. She gasped, eyes wide. Divorce? That's insane. I let out a hollow laugh. Yeah, it's insane. So is leaving your kid alone while you gallivant with some friend? She had no response to that. The aftermath, Child Protective Services. A week later, Child Protective Services, CPS, launched their investigation. They interviewed Jess, me, and 6-year-old Sophie separately. They concluded that while it was indeed negligence to vanish for half a day with no arrangement for a minor, it seemed to be the first major offense because the mother was typically present in other areas of the child's life, and I had stepped in quickly. They decided to allow Jess to keep custody on a conditional basis. The condition was that CPS would perform unannounced visits verifying Sophie's safety. If any new incident occurred, Jess could lose custody rights altogether. Meanwhile, I officially filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and referencing the mall incident. Our daughter, thanks to the courts leaning favorably toward the mother, ended up living primarily with Jess. The judge took the stance that one mistake shouldn't brand her an unfit mother, especially since I had been around to rectify the situation. However, the judge did grant me consistent visitation, Sundays plus some holidays. I wasn't thrilled. Part of me wanted full custody, but my lawyer advised me not to push too hard right now. Jess tried repeatedly to talk me out of the divorce. She'd text me long apologies, swear there was no sexual affair, claim that she just needed emotional support from someone after feeling neglected. She insisted she was planning to head home, but lost track of time. I found it hard to believe. Whether they physically slept together or not, the emotional betrayal stung enough. I told her the damage was done. She seemed heartbroken, but also frustrated, claiming I was turning Sophie against her. In reality, Sophie just sensed the tension and blamed her mother for leaving Dad, though I tried not to poison Sophie's mind. A month later, I settled into a small apartment near my workplace, sorting out a new routine. Every Sunday, I pick up Sophie in the morning. We spend the day together, trips to the park, or making pancakes, or sometimes just staying and reading. She's only 6, but I can tell she's adapting. She rarely mentions that night in the mall or the fight, though once in a while she asks, why can't you both be together? And I have to gently say, we just need space. Jess remains in our old house, which ironically is now overshadowed by the watchful-eyed CPS. She's on probation, so to speak. The social worker, Samantha, does random checks. If Jess is found leaving Sophie alone again, the next step could be removing Sophie from her care. Jess has improved, apparently. She stopped seeing Alex, assuming that was ever innocent, and focuses on demonstrating she's a responsible mother. She's told me multiple times how grateful she is that I didn't push for full custody. My response was always the same. You're lucky you still have Sophie at all. She tried once to ask if I'd consider returning. She said, we can fix the marriage for Sophie's sake. But I can't trust her. The memory of that day is etched in my mind. The humiliation, the fear for my daughter's well-being, the rage of discovering Jess with another man. I told Jess no. Right now, I need to move on, even if it means seeing my daughter only once a week. The heartbreak is intense, but I refuse to remain with someone who disregarded her responsibilities so casually. Final reflections. As it stands, we're divorcing. Jess retains primary custody, with me having Sundays plus rotating weekends and some holidays. Child Services is still monitoring Jess's household for 6 months, ensuring she's not leaving Sophie alone. If she fails any surprise check, they'll revisit the custody decision. Jess is walking a tightrope, knowing any misstep could cost her dearly. For me, it's bittersweet. I never wanted to break our family, but trust is the foundation of marriage, and she demolished that trust the moment she chose secrecy and irresponsibility, possibly an affair. Even if it wasn't a full-blown affair, the line was crossed. Our daughter, ironically, ends up in the middle, but at least I see her regularly. On those Sundays, I pour all my love into her, determined to show her stability and care. Does my heart still pang with regret? Absolutely. I recall the good times, vacations, birthdays, lazy Sunday mornings as a family. But I also recall the image of Jess smiling with that man in the mall, ignoring my calls, letting our child be at risk just for emotional support. That memory reminds me why I'm doing this. I refuse to let love for my child overshadow the fact that Jess systematically betrayed me. If she can be a better mother under supervision, great, but she will no longer be my wife. In the end, my daughter is safe, my life is calmer if lonelier, and Jess must live with the consequences of her negligence. Maybe one day we'll co-parent amicably, but I doubt our marriage will ever be mended. That's the final lesson. Some lines, once crossed, can be walked back. We said, "Till death do us part," but we never planned for a scenario where trust would die first.